This is Secret America.
Welcome, everybody. I am Jack Danger, along with Jay Gatling. And tonight on Secret America, we're joined by a journalist exposing what many call one of the biggest institutional failures in America. Through his Project Baltimore investigations and his book, Failure Factory, he's uncovered a shocking reality inside the education system. Students graduating without basic skills, massive funding with little accountability, and officials who can't answer the tough questions. He's a best-selling author and a reporter known for going at the truth. No spin or excuses. So joining us now, investigative reporter for Fox 45 in Baltimore, we have Christ Papst joining us now. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. The pleasure is all ours. We really appreciate it. So real quick, though, so for the first question, I'm just going to go right into it. Tell people about Project Baltimore. What is it about?
Sure. So Project Baltimore, we're an investigative unit. We work for Fox 45 in Baltimore, Maryland. And we started in January of 2017. So we've been doing this for over 9 years now. And in January of 2017, the idea behind Project Baltimore, Fox 45, our parent company, Sinclair Broadcasting, was to have a single unit that focuses long-term on one topic. It's like the old-fashioned investigative reporting from 50, 60, 70 years ago, where you have beat reporters that become experts on one topic. And in January of 2017, that topic that we picked was public education, because we could see through federal data that Baltimore City Public Schools was one of the most funded large school systems in America. But year after year after year, it's one of the lowest performing large school systems in America. So we started with investigating Baltimore City Public Schools in January of 2017. And to this day, we still do, but now we also investigate all of Maryland. And what Failure Factory is, what my book is the 9 years of our investigating of one topic, Baltimore City Public Schools, and how and why it's the most funded, but one of the lowest performing school systems in America.
It's pretty crazy, because if you're doing this 9 years on one topic, you know you got a lot to dig into. You know there's a lot of material there, a lot to uncover and a lot to unpack. If you could do this for 9 years, and it's nice to hear actual journalism going on. That's something that we love hearing, that we have actual journalists that are doing the job that that we need them to do, to uncover stuff like this on a mainstream platform. Not just, you have the people like, the Nick Shirleys and going out now and doing a lot of investigative work, but we need actual mainstream platforms like yours to do the same thing. So I'm glad you guys are still doing that. I love the name of your book, by the way, Failure Factory. It's a great name. But what is the biggest lie that Baltimore is still telling the parents of the children that go into these schools? Because a lot of them, obviously, you still haven't, I can't read, can't do basic math. So what are the other lies that they're being told by this school district as they're getting funded up the wazoo, like you said, but still not producing the results that they should, not even close?
Well, what we keep hearing is that politicians, the elected leaders that are in Maryland and Baltimore, they keep saying they want to put more money into public education. And they keep putting more money into public education. And our taxes are going up in this state. Our taxes went up $1.6 billion last year, $500 million a year before that. This year, Maryland's back in another budgetary hole, about $1.5 billion. And the main driver of that is public education funding. And the people of Maryland they're told constantly by the elected officials that if we put more money into public education, we're going to get better schools. And what Failure Factory is showing, the long-term 9-year study that we have done, is that more money does not equal better student outcomes. It simply does not. Between 2017 and 2025, which is the last year for which we have data, because 2026 is only a few months into it, we can see that the outcomes have worsened. we can see that the students in Baltimore City and throughout the entire state of Maryland are doing worse now than they were in 2017. And it's not COVID related. If you track the data, we can see that the educational outcomes were going down in 2018, 2019. This is not COVID related. It's simply the way the school systems are being operated now. They're not being operated to achieve success for students. They are being operated to acquire funding for people who work in the school system, and then to use that funding to hire more people to work in the school system. The data, if you look at it, which is what Failure Factory is, I show you the data. I'm not telling you the data, I'm showing you the data. And when you look at it over 9 years, it's undeniable.
So, I mean, even with all the funding that they get, and I mean, I assume they're hiring these people to try to educate others or whatever they're doing with them. But I want to ask you, at what point does it stop being incompetence and start looking like something intentional? And if it is something intentional, who specifically is accountable, and why aren't they facing any consequences?
Oh, it's intentional. I mean, it's fully intentional. They know what they're doing. Let's just go over a little bit of data here. I think it would really help. So in 2017, when Project Baltimore began, Baltimore City's public schools budget was $1.3 billion. In 2025, the budget was $1.8 billion. The budget went up $500 million a year, which is a 38% funding increase over those 8 years.
Is that because the students are, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but I want to ask, is that because the students look on paper, or maybe they actually are dumber? Are they saying that, are they intentionally making these kids dumber as they come up because it gets more funding? Hey, we need more funding to make these kids smarter. We need more funding for computers or whatever it is. So are they intentionally making them dumber just so, or like not educating them just so they can have more funding?
I don't think that's the case. I haven't had anybody tell me that. I haven't had teachers or parents or students or administrators, many of which I interview in the book. They haven't told me that, but it goes deeper than that. But there is an answer to your question. Let me get to it here in a second.
Sure.
So we've had over those 8 years, you have a 38% funding increase in Baltimore City public schools. Over those 8 years, after 38% more money goes into the school system, the high school graduation rate went up 1%. They went from 70 to 71%. Okay. That's the lowest in the state by far. It was the lowest in the state in 2017, lowest in the state today. Math proficiencies. The math proficiency rate went from 11% in 2017 to 12% in 2025. So you had a 38% funding increase, and math proficiencies went up 1%, 11 to 12%. Meaning 88% of the kids in Baltimore City schools are not proficient in math, with $1.8 billion going into the system. Now, let's just take a look at that data that I just talked about real quickly. You might be thinking to yourself, how do you have a 71% graduation rate and 12% of your kids are proficient in math? That's the entire school system, 12%. And 71% of them are graduating. And this goes to answering your question, which is what we've discovered in Failure Factory. And the reason I wrote this book is to inform people that the public education system is not prioritizing the education of kids, is prioritizing the acquisition of funding. And when you look at the data, what we just talked about, 71% graduation rate, 12% math proficiency, with a 38% funding increase, you can see what the school system's focused on. They're focused on acquiring more funding. That is what they're good at.
But why is the funding going up, though, if they're still continuing? I'm sorry, Jay, I want to just ask, it's kind of a piggyback off the previous question. Why is the funding going up? To me, it would seem like they would need to say that, hey, our kids are not getting what they need, so that's how we acquire more funding. So that's why I asked, it seemed like if they were intentionally doing that to the kids, like maybe they're not, teaching the best way, or they're not doing what they should be doing. That way they do get more funding by pointing to the kids and saying, our funding's not working, we need more. So if that's not the case, how are they getting more funding?
because the way that schools are funded, and this is one of the main things that I've learned in the 9 years that I've been doing this, and that's really what a lot of Failure Factory is I wrote the book because I didn't understand what was really happening in public education in January of 2017 when I wrote this book. Even though my dad was a public school teacher for 35 years in Pennsylvania, and my brother and I went to public schools K through 12 our entire lives, I didn't understand what was going on. And here's one of the main things that when I learned this, I didn't even believe that it was true, but this is true what I'm about to tell you, which answers your question. Public schools in Maryland, and many of them throughout the entire country, they do not receive funding to educate students. That's not why they receive funding. They receive funding to enroll students. Funding is tied to enrollment. Funding is not tied to education. So many of the teachers that I interview in Failure Factory, they tell me that as a result of that, school systems are not focused on learning, they're focused on passing. Because when you pass a child, that child is more likely to stay enrolled because they see a light at the end of the tunnel. They see a high school diploma. And that is exactly how you get 71% graduation rates with 12% math proficiencies, because the school systems are passing the kids, not educating the kids, because they get money to pass them. They do not get money to educate them. And if we're going to change public education, if we're going to make it better, you have to change the incentive structure. We're humans. We're incentivized by everything. We don't just do things to do them. We do them because there's a reward for them. I go to work every day because there's a reward. It's called money. And I do this job. I'm sitting here with you because for me, the reward is to try to get this book in people's hands. I want people to understand what's going on in public education. But in public education, the reward is the money that's tied to enrollment, not learning.
Interesting.
Well, I'm glad, because my next question to you was going to be, you actually uncovered administrators who are changing failing grades to passing grades.
Yeah.
So now, why, first of all, has no one gone to jail for that? Has there been an official investigation opened into that by anyone? Have you given that information to anybody who could possibly open an investigation? And that's shocking, because even with them changing grades or fudging grades, their numbers are still terrible. So, I mean, I could imagine how bad the numbers really are if they were actually doing it by the book. So I know I gave you a lot there, but if you could respond to that, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Of the 9 years that Failure Factory covers, 5 of those years is an investigation that we had done into grade changing. And I'm not talking about changing a B to an A or a C to a B. I'm talking changing failing grades, many of them the lowest failing grade you can have, and administrators going into teachers' grade books and giving a student a 60, which is the lowest possible passing grade. And we were able to document that that is happening thousands and thousands and thousands of times every year in Baltimore City public schools, that failing grades are being changed to passing. Why are they doing it? Because the focus is on passing kids, not educating kids, because you just got to follow the money. And this was something that took us years to figure out. Like, why would you pass a kid who's failing? That child you are setting up for future failure. They're going to fall farther and farther behind. They're not going to be able to do the work. They're going to get frustrated. But if you do keep passing them along and changing their grades, they're going to eventually get a diploma. Again, 71% graduation rate, 12% math proficiency. So it all goes back to money. Now, when we broke these stories, and we covered this for 5 years, the state investigated, the state inspector general for education, after we had sued Baltimore City Public Schools to get documents that we can talk about a little bit if you want, but it's, it's another topic. The inspector general for education investigated, and he found that over a 4-year period, there were 12,542 failing grades were improperly changed to passing.
How many people were doing that? How many different
The whole school system. It was the whole school system. It was an unwritten rule throughout the entire school system that you don't fail kids. You pass them. I have a text message in this book from a principal to her teachers, all of her teachers, one of the teachers gave me the text message. It's instructing her teachers to change their failing grades to passing so we don't fail any kids in this school. I have the text messages in the book. You can read it for yourself. There was an internal investigation Baltimore City Schools did into that text message after we got it and put it on TV. They determined that that principal did improperly change failing grades to passing, cheated kids out of an education. She didn't lose her job.
I was going to say,
she not get criminally charged. She didn't even lose her job. She's still working for Baltimore City Schools.
Insane.
Incredible. That is insane. So let me ask you then, what happens to teachers or insiders who come to you with information, and what's the most blatant example you've seen of the system trying to bury the truth?
Well, they generally get fired if they blow the whistle, and they know that. So most of the teachers in this book that I talk to, and most of the administrators in this book that I talk to, actually all of them, they come to me anonymously because they know what's going on. They're watching it. They're seeing it. They know that it's wrong, but they make very good six-figure salaries, and they have very good pensions, and they have very good health care, and they get their summers off, and they don't want to lose that. So when they come to me anonymously, and they say, listen, here's my ID. I have to look them up. I do my vetting. I make sure they are who they are, but they're like, you cannot tell anybody who I am because I'll lose my job. And the reason I know that is because there's one teacher in this book who did come forward with her face and name. And you know what happened? She lost her job.
She loses her job, but the principal doesn't. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Now, to answer your other question, the most blatant cover-up was the lawsuit. So what we had done was we had a lot of teachers that were coming to us saying that they were failing students. Students were getting failing grades in their classes, but they were still graduating. And the teachers are like, how is this happening? And they would go into their grade book and see that somebody had gone into their grades and changed the failing grades to passing. And it turned out to be the administrators of the school because they want to get these kids to graduation. They want to keep passing them. So I filed a public records request with Baltimore City Public Schools for emails and internal grade changing investigations related to, grade changing. And they gave me nothing. They said, we're not going to give you anything. So we sued them. And, it's a 5-year long story, but essentially we took them to court. We won. We were able to get everything that we wanted. And what we could see, we got 8,000 emails, many of them from teachers that were pleading with their principals, quit going into my grade book and changing the grade for this student. He didn't do any extra work. He never came to my class. He never once came to my class. We had examples of that. And the student is passing classes, never having shown up to them. It's a systemic problem. It's massive. And you had mentioned, what would the grades actually look like if kids didn't pass that weren't supposed to pass? And the teachers that I'm talking with are saying it would probably be more than half of the school system if you actually rewarded the kids that earned it with a passing grade. That would probably be less than half of the kids.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So let me ask you then, if the money isn't reaching the students, obviously it's not translating into better grades, or well, it is translating into better grades, but it's not translating into better education. Where is the money going?
Well, most of the money in the school system goes to salaries, pensions, and benefits. Now, if you're asking about the administrative state, Baltimore City Schools, according to the U.S. Census, I think it's third or fourth highest in terms of per pupil spending per administrator. And that would be money that is not getting to the kids. So let's just talk about some of the things we already talked about, and I can expand on that. We mentioned that the school system got a 38% funding increase in 8 years from 2017 to 2025, $500 million funding increase. Well, what did they do with that money? Well, a good chunk of that money went to giving their existing employees a raise. All right. So as the kids are not improving in their educational outcomes at all, the people who work in the school system are getting healthy raises. Well, then the school system also hired in those 8 years 1,700 additional employees. All right, so they went from about 10,500 employees to over 12,000. They hired.
Do you know how many of those are new teachers?
Well, that was my next point. So
okay.
of those 1,700 new employees, 200 of them are teachers, meaning 1,500 of the 1,700 additional employees are not teachers.
What?
Now, if you're a school system and your job is to educate kids and that was your priority, don't you think you'd hire more teachers?
What are they? They're not all custodians. What?
Well, a lot of them are
Administrators.
administrators. They're director level positions. They're C-suite positions.
Oh my
The school system's going to tell you that we're hiring psychiatrists and psychologists, and we're hiring wellness professionals for the students because they need it, and maybe they do, but that's not translating into an education. What these kids need is a better education. And the reason Baltimore is the way Baltimore is, which is a very struggling city with extremely high crime rates, extremely high poverty, and low economic output, the reason that's happening is because the school system for many years has simply not been giving the people of the city the education they need. That is what they need. They need an education to be able to get themselves out of the cycle of poverty that unfortunately so many people in this city are in.
I'm sure there's a lot of great teachers. You speak to them all the time. There's great teachers. I come from a family of teachers. My whole family, administrators, teachers. But even if you have a good teacher, they can't seem to be able to translate their skills into getting these kids a better education. Is it the curriculum they're being forced? Is there one specific thing or a couple of specific things that are stopping even good teachers from breaking through to some of these students?
Sure. So a lot of the teachers that I'm speaking with, a lot of them that you can read their own words in Failure Factory, it goes back to the environment of the school. And what I've noticed, another big investigation that we have done, one entire chapter in this book, is how the school systems are actively covering up violence and weapons and fights in the schools. They're covering up suspensions. They're covering up expulsions. So why would you do that? Well, because it's very important to schools what they look like on paper. So what the schools try to do is they try to minimize fights. They try to minimize violence. They try to minimize weapons that are brought into school. They don't want that stuff making the news. They don't want that stuff being on the record. They want their schools to look safe on paper. So what that has resulted in, and this is almost every single teacher I talk to, and it's not just Baltimore City, it's all throughout the state of Maryland. What that has resulted in is a situation in schools where the students realize that they're not going to be held accountable for their actions. So their behavior is terrible. And again, I'm going to speak sort of in generalities here, but this is every single teacher I talk to. And we look in America and we hear about this massive teacher shortage. Well, it's not because people don't want to teach. It's because people don't want to teach in the environments that have been created in many public schools, which is a lack of discipline and accountability for the students. If you talk to a teacher, the teacher has no ability to discipline kids anymore. If a kid is acting out in their classroom and they send them to the principal, next period, the kid's right back in the classroom disrupting learning. And if you have 20 kids or 25 kids in a classroom and one of them is acting out, it affects the learning for the other kids, every single other kid. And the teachers are being stripped of their ability in many ways to control their classrooms because the administrators don't want suspensions. They don't want expulsions. They want their schools to look safe on paper. That is the biggest problem right now that I'm hearing about is student behavior, bullying, fights, violence in public schools.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you'll see violence against teachers all the time these days, videos of students actually beating on their teachers because there are no consequences. It teaches them that there's no results for their actions. So they don't have to, hold back any of their actions. But let me ask you, what's the one story that shook you personally the most? And have you ever been pressured directly or indirectly to back off a story?
Oh yeah, I mean we get attacked a lot from Baltimore City schools. Like what they try to do is they try to delegitimize us. They call us names. They say we're propaganda. They say we're sensationalizing. But this book came out a couple months ago, and this book is a bestseller and it's doing really well. And not one person has come forward with any indication that anything in it is not true.
Well, you can't
Everything's
sensationalize facts,
true.
right?
Yeah, they don't like it. They don't like it at all.
They can't
And
deny it.
They do attack us, but they can't deny what the facts are, because all the data in the book, everything that we're talking about, is coming from the Maryland State Department of Education, Baltimore City Public Schools, or the U.S. Department of Education. It's all sourced. You can look at it for yourself, and you can see. And one of the big things that shook me, that really convinced me that this book needs to be written, was when we sued Baltimore City Public Schools, and we were in the courtroom, and I testified for a few hours about the case, and why I explained to the judge why I felt that these were public records that the public deserved to have. And at the end of that, the judge not only said that we won, but the judge said that Baltimore City Schools, and these were her words, this is a circuit court judge in Baltimore City. She said that Baltimore City Schools willfully and knowingly violated the law by not handing over the documents. What she said was that the school system knew what it was doing was illegal, but they did it anyway. And in her words, it was to cover potential wrongdoing, to cover it up. This is the judge after hearing all the testimony, not Chris Papst, not Fox 45 News. This is a Baltimore City Circuit Court judge determining the school system willfully and knowingly broke the law to cover up a massive grade changing scandal. And not only did she do that, but because this was so egregious, she forced the school system to pay our legal fees of nearly $200,000. Wow. So taxpayers had to pay Fox 45's legal fees. The judge ordered this, by the way, because of what they did. So Baltimore City Schools paid probably $500,000 to $1 million, because that $200,000 is just us. It doesn't count what they paid their attorneys. They paid $500,000, let's call it, $500,000 taxpayer dollars to cover up a grade changing scandal. They didn't want it to get out. And the most egregious part of that, in many people's view, is that the superintendent is still there. The Baltimore City Public School CEO, she's a CEO, the same one that was there in January of 2017 when we started Project Baltimore, is still there today. So everything that we have talked about so far in this podcast, the same person has presided over all of it. She has the complete support of the mayor, the complete support of the president of city council and all of city council, the state legislature, the governor, they all support her. So if you really want to know why Baltimore City Schools is getting so much money and the student outcomes are getting worse, it's because the leadership is fully supported by the elected leaders in Maryland and Baltimore City.
And that's a heavily Democrat area, right?
All Democrat. So there is, and that's, this book is not a political book. I don't talk about Democrats or Republicans.
It is what it is.
Because I don't want people to look at the data through that lens. So I don't even talk about that.
Well, you honestly don't have to, because I mean, when you see that, it's usually leans one way.
Well, Chris, Baltimore City is it's not just one party rule. There has not been a Republican elected to city council since the 1930s, almost 100 years. There's not been a Republican elected mayor since the 60s.
Jeez. It's the definition of insanity. It really is. You just brought it up, the superintendent. There was an anti-Semitism investigation on top of everything else that you've mentioned. And I'm seeing here that CEO is up for National Superintendent of the Year. Am I reading that wrong? Is that?
No, you're right. She was a finalist. She did not win. But that superintendent that you just talked about, that's also the center of a federal anti-Semitic investigation, right? She was a finalist for Superintendent of the Year. She's currently the Maryland Superintendent of the Year. So you have what you have in Baltimore City, and this is a story that we did like 2 weeks ago, is currently Baltimore City Public Schools is the highest funded school system in the state of Maryland by far. Probably the second or third highest funded school system in America when looking at large school systems. And that's U.S. Census data. Right now, Baltimore City Schools has the lowest high school graduation rate in the state of Maryland, the lowest average SAT score in the state of Maryland, the lowest attendance rate, the highest chronic absenteeism rate, the lowest English proficiency rate, and the second lowest math proficiency rate. All of that in the state of Maryland. And the superintendent is the Maryland Superintendent of the Year.
What's her name?
Dr. Sonia Santelises.
Wow, that is incredible. So let me ask you then, is Baltimore an outlier, or is this a preview of what's happening in other major cities? And is there a point when it becomes irreversible?
Well, that's why I wrote Failure Factory, because what is happening in Baltimore is happening throughout Maryland, and it's also happening throughout the entire country. And we can see it in the data. We can see that public education spending has significantly increased in the past 10 years. But we can see student outcomes are either stagnant or getting worse. The number of students enrolled in public schools is going down, largely because people are getting out of public schools. There's increases in homeschooling, micro schooling, charter schools. People are finding other options. But even with more funding and more employees in public schools, we know that's happening as well, much like it is in Baltimore City that we talked about. They've hired a lot of new employees. The educational outcomes for students are not getting better. That's why I wrote this book. It doesn't have to be this way. There are a bunch of ways, some of them, pretty simple, some of them a little bit more complex, that we can fix public education. And I tell you what they are in the book, because there are places in Maryland where we're seeing great success. There are certain schools that are getting the same per pupil expenditures. They're pulling kids from the same neighborhoods, but they're seeing much higher academic proficiencies. And there are schools that are doing a great job. But in public education, as we talked about a few minutes ago, there's not an incentive to create a better environment for kids. The incentive is simply to enroll them.
Yeah, it should be to graduate them with passing grades, legitimate passing grades. I'm more I hear this, I'm thinking of the movie Lean on Me with Joe Clark with East Side High. Discipline shouldn't be the enemy of enthusiasm. And I think the discipline you talked about in the classrooms is a big deal. So teachers could actually run a classroom, have the authority to kick people out who are disrupting the class, so the other kids in there who want to learn can learn. I think that's a basic thing that every school district can implement, and have the back of their teachers to say, hey, you got a problem, come to us. We'll deal with it. We'll get the problem children out of here. We'll discipline them. We'll suspend them. And I don't think they would get, I think people would want that. The public would be behind them too, to say, yeah, especially if my kid is going to this school, I want these kids who are causing a problem in that classroom disciplined. I'm not going to fight against that. And I think a lot of people, maybe they're afraid to say it, but I think once it was done, they wouldn't be. What keeps you going? I mean, you've been doing this a long time now on this one subject. You've written a book about it. You got it behind you, Failure Factory. What keeps you going? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel where you think, I know you've made some changes, laws have been implemented, precedent and stuff like that, but is there something that keeps you going, one specific thing to say, this is what my life's work here is going to maybe change and accomplish?
What keeps me going is I love my job. And, I'm an investigative journalist. I've been doing this for, how old am I? Probably 24 years, I would say. And it's my passion. And, public education isn't necessarily my passion. Investigative reporting is my passion. And whether I were doing public schools, or whether I was doing public transit, or if I were investigating, the police department or public works, I would have this much passion in it because I love what I do. And I think that what I am doing does have meaning. I think we're helping. I think that we certainly have done a lot of really good work. You mentioned that there's been laws that have been changed in Maryland. We set legal precedent with that lawsuit. That lawsuit now, because there's not very many public records lawsuits that get filed because they're very expensive and you're not necessarily guaranteed attorney's fees. But when we filed that lawsuit and won, that set a precedent throughout the entire state of how to win public records lawsuits. So we've done a lot of really good work, and I feel like I'm trying to make my community better. And that's part of what local journalism is. And that's a big part of local journalism, is that, I live here. This is where I raise my kids. My kids go to public schools, and I want this area to get better. And one of the main differences between local journalism and national journalism is that I don't go 1,000 miles away when the story's over. I just go home up the street. Mm-hmm. And in national journalism, there's usually a disaster, unfortunately, and people from New York and DC and LA, come to little towns, and when it's over, they go home. Well, the local journalist, stays there. And that's me. I'm a local journalist, and I love what I do, and I feel like I'm making a positive impact on my community.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's very admirable. Yeah, you are making a positive impact. That's already been seen, like you said, in the laws that have been made and the precedent set, like with the public records lawsuit that you were talking about. So let me ask you, you said that there are other schools in the area that do pull from the same neighborhoods, the same pool of kids that do have the same similar, per capita or per student expenditures, but they're successful. Why is that, do you think? I mean, I know you probably, I assume you put that in your book also, but why is that?
Yeah. It's usually what I've noticed in these schools that are highly successful is that you have a couple things, but it all revolves around a really good leader. And that leader is the principal. And are the teachers bought in to what the principal's trying to do? Do the teachers understand that that principal is going to do everything she or he can to get you out of the classroom if you're not driven and successful and helping these kids? Is that teacher energizing you, or is that principal energizing you? Will that principal defend you? If you have a problem kid in your classroom and you send them to the principal's office, is that principal going to send them right back to disrupt your classroom? Or is that principal going to do what they should do, which is figure out why the student is acting out, understand the situation, and then give that student the help that they need? Because I'm under the belief that almost every kid is a good kid, and they can all be brought back if you understand the problems. Why are you acting out? Did you eat this morning? Are you having issues at home? Are your parents struggling? Are they divorcing? Are they drug addicts? Are you living in poverty? Did you not get enough sleep last night? Figure out what is wrong with the kid, why they're acting out. They all have a reason. And that's what the great principals do. They discipline the kids. They hold the kids accountable. They hold their teachers accountable for ensuring that the students are learning. Okay. Now, whether or not you're a principal and 100% of your kids are proficient or 0% of your kids are proficient, you make the same amount of money. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you enroll the kids. But there are principals out there that are self-driven, that want what's best, and they're not going to allow the kids or their school to fail. We need more principals like that. Unfortunately, what we have seen is that those principals are rare. But if we can somehow figure out a way to change the incentive structure in a way where you can deliver more money to the teachers and the principals that are higher achieving, I think that would really help.
You're going to have unions obviously involved in stuff like that. That's for sure.
Well, there's examples of it that has happened before. Maryland used to do it. So 15 years ago, Maryland had the best school system in the entire country. Maryland was number one, according to the U.S. Department of Education. Now we're like number 30, depending on between 30 and 40, somewhere in there. When Maryland was the number one schools in the country, the superintendent, the state superintendent had an incentive structure, and she challenged every school in the state. And it's not necessarily where you start, because if you're a teacher and let's say you're a 9th grade teacher and you get a kid who's reading at a 5th grade level, okay, that's not your fault as a 9th grade teacher. You shouldn't be punished for that. But you can be rewarded for getting that kid from a 5th grade reading level to an 8th. And that's what Maryland used to do. It used to incentivize schools based on how the students grew over a school year. But Maryland got rid of that.
Why?
I wasn't here. So that happened before I got here. So I wasn't part of those discussions. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would think, like I said, you always have unions. That'll be a problem with that. Oh, we can't have teachers. This one making more. I mean, a lot of stuff has to be worked out. Contracts have to be worked out. But that is something, that should be looked at, and they should sit down and try to figure it out. So basically, I think you believe you don't have to blow this whole thing up. There are ways to figure out how to make public education better without blowing the system up completely.
I mean, yeah. So there's little things that you can change. Simply getting problematic kids out of the classroom. You can do that tomorrow. It wouldn't cost a school system anything. Take the kid out, figure out what their problem is, address the problem before you put the student back in the classroom. Okay. But why isn't that happening? Because there's not an incentive to do it. All that matters is if that kid's enrolled. Right? So you got to create these incentive structures to be able to do things like that. And that's one of the main things. Just do that. Another big thing that would really help is if you gave principals the ability to quickly remove a bad teacher or a low performing teacher from the classroom. But what we do in America is that we give these teachers tenure, and they're very, very difficult to get out of the classroom. Well, who does that benefit? Does that benefit the students who have an underperforming teacher, or does that benefit the adults? We have to start making decisions that benefit students, not adults. And it's too often in the school system that decisions are made to benefit adults.
Absolutely. So if you, I'm just going to ask you this last question, and then go ahead and tell everybody, where they can get your book and, your website and all that. So if you had 60 seconds in front of every parent in America, what would you tell them about what's really happening in their schools?
I would tell them that most of what they know about their school likely is not true. And what Failure Factory does is it educates parents or taxpayers on what really to look for inside of a public school to understand how it's actually achieving. What the book is really a manual to say, I know you're busy, you're working 50 hours a week, you're raising kids, but this book will teach you what to look for. So you know what data is being manipulated, what data is real, and the things to look for in your school that are going to show you whether you're high performing or low performing, because the school's always going to tell you that it's high performing.
Sounds like it's a must read. Honestly, for anybody with kids in school, it's a must. It sounds like it's a must read and invaluable information in that book. And keep up the awesome work with the investigative journalism. We need a lot more people like you that do this type of work in, like you said, not just with schools, but all over police. And I was a former cop, so all of it. We need so many more journalists like you who are actually doing real journalism, real investigative work, and sticking to it and fighting, for what is right. So that's awesome. I would love to having you on. It was really great. Go ahead,
Real
Jack.
quick, tell everybody, where they can purchase your book, and anything else that you'd like to tell them, actually.
Sure. So it's right here. It's called Failure Factory: How Baltimore City Public Schools Deprive Taxpayers and Students of a Future. It's available anywhere books are sold: Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Goodreads, your local bookstore. If they don't have it, they can certainly order it. I'm the easiest person in the world to get a hold of. Just Chris Papst, P-A-P-S-T, chrispapst.com, Chris Papst on X, Chris Papst on Facebook. So, if you get a chance to pick up a copy of the book, let me know what you think. Write reviews. My goal here is that I'm trying to, not trying to be, make a pun here, but educate people on what's really happening inside of public schools. Because I think if people actually knew, and everything that we've talked about here is 50 pages of a 250-page book. If people really knew what was going on, they would realize it's unacceptable and it has to change.
And that's the thing. Most people don't know. They're really naive when it comes to what's going on at their kids' schools. The only thing they know is maybe like at a parent-teacher conference or some kind of homework that they bring home. They don't actually know what goes on there on a day-to-day basis. So I want to thank you very much for joining us here today. And everybody, be sure, go get your copy of Failure Factory. It's an excellent book. Amazon.com. Go to chrispapst.com. Drop him a line. Tell him what you think. Write a review. And Chris, we really appreciate you coming on with us today.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much. Anytime that educational issues come up in the future, if you want to have me back on, you got my contact information. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. We definitely will. You have a great night.
Thank you.
All right, Jay, that was very informative, man. I got to say, the book has got to be interesting. I really hope that a lot of parents see this and do actually read that book, because like I said, most of them don't know what's going on out there.
Yeah, 100%. I thought it was really great. I mean, it's shocking though, isn't it though? The amount of money that is just pissed away
Where
on
does all this money? I mean,
education.
where does all this money go though? They're hiring all these people, but I mean, how much are you paying these people that you're
Wow.
spending all this kind of money?
A lot. They're paying them a lot. Even as where I live, Jack, you'll have not even the teachers. The teachers here make a decent salary, but it's very expensive to live here, and they should make a decent salary. But the amount of administrators, not the principal, not the assistant principal, but once you go to the superintendent level, the amount, I'm like, I'll go to like when my kids were in school and they're introducing everybody, say at an event or, at a graduation or an assembly, and they'll introduce these administrators who are there. And how many superintendents do we need? I would say to myself, like, and they're all making over 200,000 to 300,000 a year.
Oh yeah,
and
six
up.
figures easy, definitely.
With 300 and up for a superintendents where I am. So that's where a lot of the money is. And you know what else I also noticed? Did you ever, when I was growing up, when we were playing on the field, on the football field or wherever, Jack, I was picking rocks out of my knees, there were little pebbles all over the place. Every single school that I see now, anywhere, even if it's not quote unquote a good district, has a football field that the New York Jets or Giants would be happy to play on.
Well, that has a lot to do with the football program and just like the basketball program bringing in a lot of money for the school.
But I'm not even saying that, Jack.
They do that.
No, Jack, I'm just saying not even if it's a great program. These fields.
No, I know,
now,
but that even if it's not a great program, people still brings in a lot of money for the school itself, because it's not just the budget that they get. It's also like the ticket sales and stuff like that, because they get a budget, but then they also get extra money for whatever else they can bring in.
I'm jealous. Maybe that's what it is, because I see these fields. I'm like, damn, they didn't have these fields when I was playing.
No.
They didn't exist.
It's insane. Now they're all like NFL stadiums now. Soon they're all going to be having domes, billion-dollar domes, and NBA size courts. It's going to be crazy out there. You're going to see all the teachers wearing gold chains and everything. I mean, it should be tied to incentives. Incentives based on performance. It should be tied to something like that. I don't see what I don't understand, Jay, is in this day and age, in 2026, why is this not, basic? Why is this not like the basic rules for everything? Common sense is just so uncommon these days that it's laughable. I mean, these things are basic. Yes, you want to tie pay based on performance. Isn't that the way it's tied in every other profession? I mean, you get a raise based on your performance, however much, experience you have is what your starting pay is. But here, no, it's based on how many kids you can enroll, or, it's really just based on how well your union is at negotiating. I don't think that should be the case.
Well, especially when it comes to kids. And listen, I understand why there are teachers unions. I get it. But they've always been, teachers unions to me have always been so rigid and not really wanting to budge on anything like that. And then at the same time, we'll hear, oh, it's all about the kids.
Most of them are criminal organizations. If you want the truth.
Jack, if it's all about the kids, then maybe you got to budge a little bit at this point, because how much longer when the police mess up, and we've made police reforms, body cameras, this and that, everything. When do the teachers actually, when are we going to see a real reform when it comes to public schools and the teachers in the public sector in our country?
The leaders have to actually want to act. See, the thing is, there's not enough outrage, because when there's outrage, that's when change happens, because it forces the leaders to act. That's why when police, you got the body cams, and you got all this. Police have unions too, but they have the body cams and stuff because the leaders were forced to act based on outrage. Now, there's not enough people that are outraged at how poorly the schools are doing or this or that. And that's why it takes journalists like this. See, with police, there's journalists all out there ready to catch a police doing something they shouldn't be doing, but they're not ready to catch a teacher doing something they shouldn't be doing. And since they're not ready to do that, there is no outrage. And that's why we need people like Christ Papst, and we need other journalists, but it needs to happen on a national scale, because that's the only way you get real outrage. And that's the only way you get real change, is if everybody can see it. If only the people in your district see it, or only local people see it, a lot of times that doesn't manufacture enough outrage, because your leaders don't actually give a damn about you. But if it's national and they're getting letters and phone calls and shit from everybody all over the country, that's different. So we need national type investigative reporters to do this. And Christ Papst's book is an excellent way to do this, I think. And this could help possibly generate some of that outrage.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And you made a great point. And the outrage has to be there. Well, a lot with the police, a lot of it was manufactured outrage. Because like you said, they're always looking to jump on the cops and the numbers were skewed. It was, but it generated the outrage. It got to change. Oh, we want body cameras. They don't like them now because it actually shows that, yeah, it wasn't really.
And you can get around unions if you have the outrage.
Right, exactly. So police unions, just as you said, they buckled a little bit and they said, all right, we'll give you the body cameras. And it actually worked out for them as a benefit, you know, I guess unintended consequence of the whole thing. But I think teachers should be wearing body cameras at this point. Where's the outrage? Again, this is our children. They're not being educated. Sometimes we know of abuse that goes on in these schools. I got to be honest, who spends more time with your kids, Jack, other than you, than the teacher?
I gotta say, nowadays, though, if you want the God's honest truth, I think it's more students abusing the teachers these days.
Oh, it's both.
And I'm not talking about sexual abuse. I'm talking about physical violence. Now, don't get me wrong. Believe it or not, I have heard of cases where there are students raping the teachers in the classroom in front of all the other students, and they beat these teachers. Videos of them slamming their teachers' faces into chalkboards, hitting them with chairs. I mean, it's ridiculous what's allowed to go on, and it's because they fester this kind of no accountability behavior. I mean, that's basically what it is. No accountability behavior. It's a cesspool.
Well, maybe the body cams will work out for the teachers in a way they worked out for the police, to protect them from abusive students, to protect them from allegations that maybe are not true. I don't see why teachers unions are resisting this. I think there should be either cameras in every classroom or the teacher should be wearing a camera. They're with our children. We want to make sure the children are safe. We also want to make sure the teachers aren't being accused of something they're not doing. We want to make sure the teachers aren't being physically abused. I think it's time for somebody to start maybe pushing that a little bit.
Well, why
because
aren't there
something's got to change, Jack. Something's got to change. And Deborah keeps saying parents. Right. Parents got to get more involved too. Then, we can't let parents off the hook. Teach your kids to show a little respect. If my kid ever talked back to a teacher, they would have hell to pay. I would have.
A lot of those parents don't know about it because the principal doesn't tell them, and they don't admonish them. They don't punish them in any way. So the parent may not even know what's going on at the school. I will say though, why aren't there cameras in each classroom of these schools? Because the schools are a public education system. The schools are paid for by the taxpayer, just like there are cameras, on the police officers. I don't know if I want body cams because police, and just like police, teachers could turn them off if they want to. But I think there should be cameras in the corner of every classroom. I don't see why there should be no issue with that if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
No, I agree with you. And with the body cams, it's supposed to go on anytime you have an interaction. If you don't, there's a consequence for that, and you have questions to answer. But I understand what you're saying. Yeah, at the very least, every classroom. I don't see what the problem is with having cameras and everything. You don't have privacy in your classroom. There's no such thing. That's a public
building. That because it's a public school. So there's no right to privacy in a public school.
And especially when you have you worry about violence in schools, school shootings. The more cameras you have, the better. So I don't see where the resistance is here other than to say, we don't want our teachers on camera the whole time. Well, no, that argument doesn't work. And it certainly doesn't work anymore. Not for me. And it shouldn't work for anybody.
No, but that you just gave me a good idea. I think a great way to get around the teachers unions and get cameras in the schools is not to say, I want cameras to watch the classrooms and watch the teacher and I want cameras to protect from school shootings, to help us with school shooting. Because if you use school shooting buzzwords, that can usually, a union can't say, hey, no, we don't want cameras. It's a right to privacy or whatever. You can say, no, but I want a lot of parents and especially, leaders can get around unions by saying buzzwords like school shooting, mass shooting. We want cameras in the classrooms to help protect students. And if the teachers say, oh, no, I don't want cameras in my class. Well, what are you against protecting students? Right, there's easy ways to do that kind of thing. Yeah. And school shootings is a great way to get cameras in classrooms.
Yep, it's right. You turn it against, wait, what? You don't care about kids getting shot? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
You don't want to stop or maybe prevent a child from being shot by somebody or help identify somebody that does that? What are you talking about? You're exactly right. So that stuff should be happening. I don't know why it's taking so long. I don't know any parent. I don't know any parent that would be against having cameras in classrooms. And even if you go for any reason, Jack, those are where my kids are. I want to know what's going on.
Yeah,
Jack, parents don't send their kids out of a house at the age of 8 without a cell phone at this point.
No, but like I said, though, the leaders will only do that sort of thing if there is outrage. Even if we just manufacture the outrage. I can't believe my student's school doesn't have cameras in the classrooms after all these school shootings. Manufacture that outrage. But that's the only way the leaders are going to change, because the leaders do not want to change anything. They're resistant to change. You have to force them to change through outrage or manufactured outrage, one way or the other. If parents get enough, why don't parents have a freaking union? Get the parents in a damn union. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, listen, if you manufacture the outrage, you did it for the cops, you got some changes you wanted, why not do it for the teachers? And it should be around safety and security of your students. Those are our children. The most important thing we have, the most valuable asset that we have, the thing we care about the most are our children. So there's really no argument against it anymore. And some of the stuff Chris was talking about, I mean, the grade changing, and the fact that nobody's been put in prison for this.
And he said it was going on the entire school district. I mean, every school was doing this. It wasn't just one lone principal here, one lone principal there. Apparently, they were all doing this, which is
insane.
I mean, but see, that tells you right there, if they're all doing it, someone has to be at the head of this. Someone has to be saying, hey, look, I want you to do it. 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 They need to look a little closer at that superintendent and say, hey, I wonder if she's telling these Baltimore city principals or whoever they are to do this sort of thing. Because I can tell you right now that one or two Baltimore city principals might think to do that thing, but there's no way they're all going to think to do that thing for more funding unless the superintendent tells them, and maybe even tells the unions that, hey, if you want your teachers to get more money, then that's what they need to do. They need to change the freaking grades.
Yeah, right. More enrollment equals more money equals we have more money for your next contract. Bottom line, it always comes down to the money. And like you said, the fact that it's thousands, he said thousands of grades. And if it's going on in Baltimore, guess what? It's going on everywhere.
And there's no accountability in Democrat-run areas. None.
No. I mean, this is criminal. It's outrageous. And these are the same people, though, that'll get on the soapbox and tell you about the children. You could care less about the children. You're running something that could directly benefit children. And what are you doing? You're corrupt. You're corrupting them. You're setting them up for failure. And it's an endless cycle. And all you care about is lining your pockets. It's disgusting.
Exactly. And the students, I mean, don't get me wrong. The students are going to be like, hey, yeah, I'm happy to not have to do this schoolwork. I'm happy to not have to show up and still get passing grades. But that's a normal child reaction.
Right.
That's a normal student reaction. I don't want to go to school. If I can get passing grades and not go to school, I'm going to. But that is a normal teenage child reaction. But it's the parents and especially the teachers and the principal that has to force these kids and hold them accountable. You either come to school or you get a failing grade. The funding has got to be tied to performance, because if it's tied to enrollment, this is the kind of shit you get. Grades are going to be changed. People are going to be passed that shouldn't be passed. And the thing is, not only is it setting them up for failure, it is setting America up for failure. Absolutely. Because what happens when you have this on a mass national scale happening and you're graduating people with 15-20% literacy rate across every state in America?
We have 15,
you have people that can't read, and yet they're going to be running America in a generation or so, and they can't even read.
We have a stupid country, and no wonder why China's taking over the country right under our nose. No wonder.
China, for all the faults that China has, they force their kids to learn shit. They force their kids. I saw videos where they were forcing their kids to learn how to take guns apart, put them back together. I'm talking elementary school kids. Now, maybe we can debate whether they should or should not do that later, but they are showing them how to do things that they're going to need to know when they're an adult, not just putting guns and back together. But they're not teaching them bullshit at schools like, how to dance the Macarena in gym class. They're teaching them how to, how to maybe file their taxes, how to do this, how to pay their bills, whatever it is. They're teaching them shit that will matter when they become an adult.
Absolutely. Well, Jack, we got about 30 seconds left. Why don't you put up our social media to let everybody know how they can find us, and we'll call it a night.
Absolutely. Everybody, make sure you follow us. Secret America TV. It is our screen name for absolutely everything except for TikTok. We were banned on TikTok for telling the truth. TikTok sucks. X, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, Instagram, even Spotify and Apple. We are on. Also, we are on the Live from America TV network, rumble.com/LFA TV. Be sure to follow us everywhere. Secret America TV. Jay, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed having Chris Papst on. I know you did as well.
Yeah.
And we really learned a lot. So for everybody, I hope you guys also learned a lot. Be sure to pick up his book, read it, and tell your friends about it, because parents need to know these kind of things. So for Jay Gatling, I am Jack Danger. Thank you for watching Secret America.
You've been listening to Secret America.